The Young and the Restless spoilers shock Saturday's full October 18, 2025. In the quiet corridors of Genoa City, the air carried an unspoken tension that seemed to thicken with every passing hour. The news of Danny Romalotti and Christine Blair's upcoming wedding had spread quickly, like a rumor too powerful to contain, reaching every corner of the city and unsettling the delicate balance of friendships and rivalries that had defined so many lives. Phyllis Summers, who had once shared a complicated, almost fated connection with Danny, was among the last to hear the truth, and when she did, the shock was not so much in the announcement itself but in what it symbolized, the finality of something she had never truly let go of. Her pride, always her greatest armor and her deepest wound, would not allow her to stay silent. She made her way to see Danny and Christine, her mind already a storm of disbelief and denial, convinced that somehow she deserved a place in the circle that was now closing without her. Inside, Christine and Danny were quietly discussing the arrangements, the dinner rehearsal, the guest list, and the small details that defined a future they were both cautiously excited for. There was a serenity between them, a calm that had taken years to find after lifetimes of missteps. Yet even as Danny spoke about his bachelor party and how Daniel couldn't attend because he was in Boston with Tessa, his eyes carried that familiar flicker of guilt. He knew Phyllis would feel betrayed, no matter how gently he tried to manage her expectations. When she finally appeared, the temperature in the room changed. Her presence always commanded attention, fiery, unpredictable, magnetic in a way that both fascinated and exhausted those around her. She claimed she hadn't received an invitation, though her tone suggested she believed she'd been deliberately excluded. Danny's attempt at diplomacy failed to soothe her, and Christine's patience wore thin as the conversation turned from curiosity to accusation. Phyllis, whose emotions had always run at the extremes, oscillated between pretending to wish them well and seething at what she saw as another personal humiliation. She threw subtle jabs about wasted love and misplaced loyalty, her voice trembling not with rage but with the sting of rejection. Christine's words cut sharply in return, reminding Phyllis that she had spent a lifetime chasing connections that never lasted, a woman too familiar with loneliness to understand peace when she saw it. Phyllis, feeling cornered, turned her bitterness into self-righteousness, proclaiming that she had only come to offer congratulations. But her eyes betrayed the storm inside her, the fear of being left behind again, of being the ghost at the feast. She left with a sarcastic goodbye, her coffee cup trembling slightly in her hand, and as the door closed behind her, Christine and Danny exchanged the kind of glance that said everything words could not: relief, pity, and a trace of lingering guilt for a woman who simply could not stop fighting the past. While emotional battles played out in Genoa City, another, quieter conflict brewed miles away in Boston. In a small, dimly lit cafe, Tessa Porter sat alone at a table near the window, her fingers tracing circles on the surface of her cup, her thoughts drifting between hope and dread. She had asked Mariah Copeland to meet her, needing to bridge the silence that had been growing between them like a wall neither wanted to admit existed. The distance, emotional, physical, spiritual, had been gnawing at her, leaving her restless and uncertain. When Mariah finally appeared, her expression carried the weariness of someone who had been fighting invisible battles. Her tone was laced with exhaustion, her eyes shadowed by frustration. Tessa looked up, trying to summon warmth, but Mariah's words cut through before she could speak. The last few times she had come to meet Tessa, she had sat for hours alone, staring at an empty chair, replaying every broken promise and every missed call. Now, even with Tessa in front of her, the emptiness felt heavier, as if love itself had become a burden neither could carry gracefully. Tessa tried to lighten the air, offering small compliments, gentle smiles, searching for the old spark that used to ignite effortlessly between them. But Mariah wasn't ready to be soothed. She felt unseen, unheard, caught in a loop of disappointment. Every time she had waited, every silence between them, had turned into a mirror of her own insecurity. As Tessa spoke, trying to explain, Mariah sat motionless, staring down at her cup, her silence louder than any accusation. The calmness in her posture masked a rising storm inside her. For Tessa, that silence was unbearable. She could handle anger, tears, even accusations, but not indifference. She asked if saying all this was helping, her voice soft but trembling with fear that maybe the damage was already beyond repair. Mariah's answer was quiet yet devastatingly honest. Healing, she said, wasn't about pretending things were fine, it was about digging through the dirt until she reached something solid again, something true. Her words were not cruel, but they carried the weight of truth, the kind that forces you to see what's left after the illusion fades. The tension between them wasn't built on betrayal or deceit, but on fatigue, the exhaustion that comes when love requires constant rebuilding. Back in Genoa City, Nikki Newman was dealing with her own restlessness. The chaos within her family had become a constant undertone in her life, and the whispers of another possible crisis with Victor, Nick, or Victoria always loomed over her like an approaching storm. When she learned that Nick was heading to Los Angeles, something inside her stirred, not jealousy, not fear, but a need to be close, to hold on to the fragments of family stability that seemed to be slipping further from her grasp. She told herself she wanted to be there to support him, but deep down she knew it was more than that. She needed distance from Genoa City, from the ghosts of old choices, and perhaps from the reflection she saw in the mirror, the woman who had spent her entire life oscillating between strength and dependency, love and survival. The thought of LA, with its sun and noise and anonymity, offered her the illusion of peace, the kind that comes from pretending nothing is falling apart. Yet as the days moved forward, the weight of unspoken truths connected them all in ways none of them fully understood. Phyllis wandered the streets after leaving Christine and Danny's, her mind racing through memories that refused to fade, every glance Danny had ever given her, every time she had believed she was his true love, every moment she had convinced herself she could rewrite their story if she just tried hard enough. For a woman like Phyllis, love was never just affection, it was validation, the proof that she still mattered in a world that often preferred to forget her. She had lost that validation now, and with it, a piece of herself. Somewhere in Boston, Tessa and Mariah sat in silence, the kind that stretched endlessly between two people who once shared everything. Tessa wanted to reach across the table, to hold her wife's hand, to say something that would undo months of emotional drift, but the words refused to come. She realized that love was not just about music, laughter, or shared dreams, it was about endurance, about staying when every instinct told you to run. For Mariah, the silence was necessary. She wasn't trying to punish Tessa, she was trying to find herself again. Her mind returned to what she had said earlier. About digging through the mud. It wasn't bitterness, it was honesty. She knew she had to confront the pain, to sift through the wreckage of what they had become, before she could rebuild anything real. In that small moment, both women realized that love doesn't always end with shouting or betrayal, sometimes it dies quietly, buried under exhaustion and unmet expectations. And yet, the faintest spark still flickered in the way they looked at each other, the memory of something worth saving. Meanwhile, Christine and Danny tried to put the earlier confrontation with Phyllis behind them. They laughed lightly about it over dinner, but both carried a sense of unease. Christine, always composed, tried to convince herself that Phyllis's outburst was nothing more than a flare-up of jealousy. But deep down, she knew Phyllis was unpredictable, and unpredictability meant danger, not necessarily physical, but emotional, the kind that could sabotage joy. Danny, though happy about his engagement, couldn't shake the guilt that lingered after seeing Phyllis's pain. He remembered the past, the chaos, the passion, the heartbreak, and knew that some parts of his life would never fully close. The ghosts of old love stories always hovered around Genoa City, and no one truly escaped them. Nikki, too, would soon find that distance never really meant freedom. In Los Angeles, surrounded by noise and light, she felt more isolated than ever. The facade of glamour did little to quiet the echoes of her past, the struggles with addiction, the betrayals, the losses. She watched Nick from afar, proud yet burdened, wondering whether she had done enough to keep her family from repeating the same mistakes she had spent a lifetime trying to atone for. As night fell across Genoa City and Boston alike, the emotional threads of these lives intertwined. Phyllis walking through the city's empty streets with a sense of invisible defeat, Danny and Christine planning their wedding with cautious optimism, Mariah and Tessa trapped in the fragile quiet of their love's aftermath, Nikki staring out at the horizon, searching for meaning in the glittering chaos of Los Angeles. In every corner, hearts were breaking and rebuilding, promises were being tested, and the fragile illusion of control was slipping away. The beauty and the tragedy of Genoa City had always been the same, that love, no matter how pure or corrupted, never truly disappeared. It only changed form, finding new ways to haunt the living. The hours in Boston grew heavier after the silence between Tessa and Mariah had settled like a permanent shadow over the room. The soft hum of the cafe had faded into the background, replaced by the distant sound of rain against the window. Mariah's anger had ebbed, leaving behind something quieter and far more painful, exhaustion, the kind that comes from trying to hold together the remnants of a love that had already started slipping away. Tessa, desperate to break through the growing wall between them, reached into her bag and pulled out a worn deck of cards, her smile brittle but hopeful. She said she had been teaching Arya how to play old maid, laughing softly as though the memory alone could lighten the mood. She spread the cards on the table with familiar ease, trying to make the moment feel normal, trying to remind Mariah that their lives had once been full of small joys like this, laughter over games, late-night songs, the intimacy of shared silence. But Mariah's expression did not soften. She sat motionless, eyes downcast, her heart caught between resentment and sorrow. Tessa continued, her words gentle but trembling with the need to be understood. She mentioned how she and Daniel had been working on a song together, something special they had written for Danny and Christine's wedding, and how excited she was for Mariah to hear it. Her tone brightened momentarily, like sunlight trying to pierce through a thick cloud, but it faded quickly when she saw the look on Mariah's face. Mariah's reply came cold and certain, she didn't think that would happen. Her words were not cruel, but they struck Tessa like a quiet blow, final and absolute. It wasn't the kind of anger that invited an argument, it was the kind that signaled surrender. Tessa looked at her across the table, seeing not just her wife but a stranger cloaked in grief and distance. She told her she hated seeing her like this, lost, broken, and unreachable, and that it tore her apart. She wanted to take her home, to bring her back to the place where their laughter had once filled every room, where their love had felt invincible. But Mariah's eyes hardened as she shook her head. She wasn't ready to go back. She said she needed to stay, that returning wouldn't change what was already broken. Her voice trembled when she told Tessa not to visit again, her heart fracturing as she said it. She knew the cruelty in her words would cut deep, but sometimes love demanded distance to survive, even if it meant walking away from the only person who had ever truly understood her. Tessa stood in silence for a moment before she moved forward, wrapping her arms around Mariah with the kind of desperate tenderness that comes from knowing it might be the last time. Mariah hesitated, then returned the embrace, both women clinging to a past they could not resurrect. For a brief second, it felt like the world had stilled, two souls holding on to something fading, trying to delay the inevitable. But then Mariah pulled back, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and walked away without looking back. Tessa watched her go, her heart unraveling with each step until the door closed and she was left alone again. She sank back into the chair, staring at the deck of cards scattered on the table, and for the first time in a long while, she felt utterly defeated. The song she had written suddenly felt meaningless, the future she had imagined now hollow. Back in Genoa City, life carried on with cruel indifference. In the sterile light of a hospital room, Sharon sat by her son's bedside, her hands trembling as she brushed a strand of hair from his bandaged forehead. Noah Newman lay motionless, his head wrapped so heavily in gauze that his face was barely visible. Machines beeped steadily, each sound both a comfort and a reminder of how fragile life could be. Nick stood beside her, his usually steady voice breaking as he told his unconscious son that they needed him to get better, that the world outside was waiting for him to burn it bright again. He was trying to sound hopeful, but his eyes betrayed the fear he couldn't hide. He had always been the strong one, the protector, the man who held everyone else together, yet here he was, barely holding himself. As Sharon sat quietly, she could feel the ghost of every memory she had ever shared with Noah pressing in on her. His childhood laughter, the times he had come to her for advice, the way he had always believed she could fix anything. Now she felt powerless. The smell of antiseptic filled her lungs, and the weight of maternal helplessness suffocated her. When Nick's phone rang, the sound startled them both. He stepped aside to answer, and the familiar voices of Nikki, Victor, and Victoria flowed through the line. The Newman family was in collective turmoil. Nikki's voice trembled as she said she could fly out immediately, but Nick, trying to be practical, told her to stay put. There was nothing to do but wait, he said, even though waiting felt unbearable. Victor's tone was steady but heavy. The kind of quiet that came from a man who had seen too much tragedy but never stopped believing he could control fate. Victoria's worry was sharper, more anxious. For her, the idea of losing another family member was unthinkable. When Nick hung up, he turned back toward the bed, and for a moment, he felt like a boy again, standing in the shadow of his father's expectations, trying to be strong but failing in silence. Sharon asked the doctor if Noah would survive, her voice cracking under the weight of her fear. The doctor hesitated before answering, his expression unreadable. Sharon's stomach clenched. She didn't want statistics or medical jargon, she wanted reassurance, but there was none to give. She reached out, taking Noah's hand in hers, whispering a prayer she wasn't sure anyone was listening to. Outside the hospital, rain began to fall, thin and cold, soaking the city in a melancholy haze. Inside, Sharon sat motionless, staring at the rhythmic rise and fall of her son's chest. She thought of all the choices that had led to this moment, all the times she had wished she could protect him from the world. The irony was unbearable, for all the mistakes she had made, all the pain she had endured, nothing compared to the helplessness of watching her child suffer. Across town, word of Noah's condition spread quickly. Nikki, sitting in her Los Angeles hotel suite, could barely focus. Her thoughts were with her family, and though Nick had told her to stay, she was already planning her flight. She couldn't shake the guilt that seemed to follow her wherever she went, guilt for her past, for her mistakes, for not being there when she was needed most. The world outside her window sparkled with artificial light, but it only deepened her loneliness. She stared at her reflection, at the woman who had spent a lifetime pretending to be unbreakable, and wondered how much more loss she could endure. Back in Boston, Tessa wandered aimlessly through the city streets after leaving the cafe. The cold air stung her face, and the city's noise seemed distant, muffled beneath the weight of her thoughts. She had imagined a reconciliation, or at least understanding, but instead, she had been handed silence and goodbye. Every step she took echoed with the finality of what had just happened. She thought of Arya, of the innocence in her daughter's smile, and felt the ache of knowing that even the purest love couldn't always hold a family together. The song she and Daniel had written haunted her mind, the melody that once sounded like hope now rang hollow, like a requiem for something she couldn't save. She wondered if Daniel sensed her pain when they had played together, or if he, too, had learned to hide heartbreak behind art. Meanwhile, Christine and Danny continued to plan their wedding, blissfully unaware of the tragedies unfolding around them. Yet even in their happiness, a shadow lingered, a quiet awareness that every joy in Genoa City seemed to come at a cost. Danny couldn't stop thinking about Phyllis, about how easily she could twist love into obsession, how quickly admiration could turn into resentment. He wanted to believe she would move on, but deep down, he knew Phyllis never truly let go of anything. As night deepened, the storm outside grew fiercer. In the hospital, Sharon remained by Noah's side, refusing to leave. Nick stood at the window, staring out at the rain, feeling as though every drop mirrored the turmoil inside him. He thought about his father, about how Victor had always found a way to stay strong, to make the impossible possible. But tonight, strength felt meaningless. He turned back toward his son, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Sharon closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, praying for a miracle. In Boston, Tessa finally stopped walking. She sat on a park bench beneath a flickering streetlight, the rain soaking through her coat. She closed her eyes and began to hum the song she had written, her voice breaking as she sang the melody meant for a celebration that now felt like mourning. Every note carried fragments of memory, laughter, love, forgiveness, and the unbearable weight of goodbye. She knew that somewhere, Mariah was crying too, even if she would never admit it. Love had not ended between them, it had simply changed shape, becoming something quieter, more distant, yet no less real.